All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar on how educators can support parents and other caregivers while making the transition to online learning. My name is Haley Peterson, and I'm one of the marketing specialists here at Admentum in Minneapolis. I also have one of our senior marketing specialists on the line, Sarah Cornelius. We'll be in the background of today's presentation, making sure that all of your questions are answered. Before we get started with the presentation, I want to let everyone know that we have been having some issues with GoToWebinar recently. Due to heavy traffic on their site, it's gone down periodically, but it's up and running now, so we'll proceed as usual. But if for any reason you're having issues with audio or visuals, please let us know in the chat. If for some reason we get kicked off the webinar, we'll get back up and running as soon as possible. You can rejoin the webinar with the link you used to join today. All right, so let's get started by going over some housekeeping, and then we'll review the attendee interface. This webinar is being recorded, so that you can access it at a later time. A link to the recording will be emailed to you by the end of the day. In that email, we'll provide links to all of the resources discussed in today's webinar, as well as a certificate of attendance that can be used towards CEUs. I've also uploaded the certificate of attendance in the handout section of your control panel. I'll show you where that is in a second. We also have a copy of today's slides in there as well. All right, so let's move on and talk about the attendee interface. So right now you're looking at an example of the GoToWebinar control panel. This should be on the right-hand side of your screen. This control panel will help you participate in today's webinar, so let's take a look. So by clicking the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. The audio pane provides all of your audio information. By default, you join the webinar with a microphone and speakers. However, a microphone is not needed because you'll be muted throughout the presentation. If you're having any technical difficulties with your audio, you can go ahead and press the radio pin, which will bring up a toll-free number and an access code. You do not have to worry about an audio pin since you'll be muted. Under the audio pane is the handout section. That's where you can get a copy of the slides and the certificate of attendance for today's webinar. You also have the ability to send us questions through the question pane. I'm going to go ahead and send out a test chat just so that you guys can see where that is. You should see that pop up now. All right, so I see people chatting in that they're here and that they can hear us, so that's awesome. Please chat in any of the questions that you have throughout the presentation, as we've reserved time for a Q&A at the end of today's session. Now I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Winnie O'Leary, who will introduce today's panel. Winnie, when you're ready, you can go ahead and take over.
Super, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Winnie O'Leary, and I'm the manager of the Educator Network here at Admentum. And over the last 2 weeks, we've received hundreds of questions from educators pertaining to navigating virtual instruction and how to support our caregivers. We thought it'd be a good idea to get a panel of experts together and give you some concrete things to use. We have a lot of questions to get through today, so I'm going to go ahead and start by introducing our panel. Today we have Natasha, we have Ashley, we have Mary, and we have Laura. So we are going to just jump right in. Awesome. Everybody, thank you so much for being here, and let's start with that first question. Laura, I'm going to give this one to you. How can educators help parents who haven't been doing this? This is a new thing to them, and how do they help parents facilitate this learning?
Great question. Well, first off, take a deep breath. We know this is new territory for many of you, and we as educators need to recognize that some parents are going to jump in confidently with both feet. Some parents are going to do this trial and error, takes a little time, think it through, but there's going to be a group, hopefully a smaller percentage, that are really going to struggle with this, and they're going to need you to be their cheerleader and their coach in this. So I would suggest that you first of all start by assessing what tools they do have. Find out, do they have access to a computer? Do they have reliable internet? If they don't have those, do they at least have a smartphone? What things are your district or school providing? Let's go through this and assess exactly what materials and items they do have. What are their specific concerns? Okay. Set up a regular time of communication with those parents that are really, really worried or struggling. That could be by email, that could be by phone. You're going to probably want and need to touch base with them more frequently than some of the other parents within your circle. Start small. Okay, I want you to think Maslow over Bloom. Okay, we're thinking in terms of needs. We're thinking in terms of that level of comfort and making sure that people feel comfortable. We can worry about depth of knowledge and higher order thinking and all that way down the line. That is not where we need to be putting our effort and concern. The more we can do to encourage parents, give them that sense that they're on the right track, that's going to lead to the successes down the road.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Laura. That's a great point. All right, let's move on to question number 2. And Ashley, I'm going to throw this one out at you. We're looking at trying to figure out the day. So, what kind of expectations can you as a teacher put onto parents about building schedules and working with the students and making that day go a little bit easier?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing you need to do is have a schedule for your own day. Make sure that you're planning in time to answer your emails, to return phone calls, to have live office hours or live lessons. I do suggest that you build into your daily schedule some form of office hour in your online platform, Zoom, Google Meet, whichever format you're using. So that way your students can drop in without an appointment and just ask you any questions they have. For example, my office hour is from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock each day. My students know that they can always find me in my office at that time. My parents know this as well. So if they have a question, they don't have to call me or email me. They can pop in and ask that question face to face through that platform. So if you have that time that you can build into your schedule for all of your classes, you don't have to have one for each prep, just all of your students are welcome to come in during that one time. That will eliminate some of the extra questions that are coming in by email and by phone and all of that. But make sure that you're communicating that to your families as well. A lot of times I'm noticing that the students, middle school and high school especially, are being asked to do a lot of this stuff, but the things aren't being communicated to the parents very well. So make sure that you're communicating to the parents, this is the class that your son is in, and this is the time that I expect him to be in this online meeting each week, and this is how he's supposed to be completing his work. Then give them some suggestions for how they can set up their schedule in order to make it work. Make sure that you're remembering, though, that there are lots of different kids in a household trying to get a lot of different things done. So you might have a student who has 3 siblings that also have meetings at that same time, and the parents are going to have to prioritize or rotate to see who can go to which meetings. Or maybe they have some form of an appointment or something like that, and they can't be able to be in a live lesson. For example, during one of these webinars, my son had a live lesson, and I told him he couldn't join it. I would contact his teacher, but he can't join that because I have to be online doing a webinar at that time. And so there are going to be some reasons that the students can't get online at the exact moment. So make sure that you're sending out recordings for those times when that happens. And this is less about talking to the parents, but I do want to just also say for us as educators to make sure that we are building our schedule in such a way that it is sustainable for the long haul. It is tempting to answer an email at 10 o'clock at night, even though you have the ability to do it, even though you're not technically working at that time. But that is going to train your students and your parents to believe that you are always available. And that just can't be the case. It's not sustainable for you and for your own mental health. And it's also not a set of expectations that you want your families to follow. You want them to be able to respect your boundaries. So set up those boundaries and make sure you let your families know any messages that come in after 4 o'clock will be answered the next day. Or please leave a message anytime you call and I don't answer, I'll be able to get back with you by the afternoon. That kind of communication will let them know that you're not ignoring them, you're not going to forget to answer them, but you are going to set some clear boundaries to make sure that you are taking care of yourself and then taking care of your students well.
I think that's a really good point. And the idea of you need to stay healthy and you need to help the parents stay healthy because that all ends up trickling down to that student and making sure that student stays healthy. So Perfect. Great. Thank you. Let's go on to question number 3. And I'm going to ask Natasha, can you speak to some of the supports that need to be in place for both the elementary, the middle, the high school? I'm imagining that there's some different things that need to apply here.
Yes, thank you, Winnie. In terms of elementary students, the supports that they'll need, it's going to look a little bit different compared to high schoolers and middle schoolers. I think the first thing teachers should do is identify who that primary caregiver is going to be. Because of the nature of our current situation, you might have a parent who's a nurse or in the medical field or an essential worker, so who is going to be that designated person, and then communicate with that person and just know who that person is. Because with elementary, it's going to be more hand holding and guidance because the kiddos are not as independent and they need that caregiver or parent or guardian for this to be successful. I suggest starting off with like having an open house, a parent meeting. I think that would work across any grade levels, but in particular for the elementary grade levels. As Ashley said, having I think a flexible schedule for your parents is important because they do have, some have students across multiple grade levels. Supporting elementary kids, I think we, provide suggestions on a designated workspace, especially if you have more than one child, like who's going to work where and what time is this student going to have the computer if you have one device, or if you have 2 devices, like make a large visual schedule, use a T-chart. If you have 2 children, break up those times. So those are some suggestions you could offer your parents. A visual timer would be useful for elementary kids. When I say visual timer, I mean a timer that, if you have a timer like a clock, kitchen timer, or a timer where the color changes as the time goes down, or online there's visual timers, I think that'll be helpful for your younger kids when they're working offline on reading or on math practice, if the school's provided packets. That way kids can visually see how much time they have left, because those concepts of time aren't necessarily built in for the younger ones. A calendar of weekly items or daily items is extremely helpful for all grade levels, but for the elementary kiddos, having it printed out so they could have like a checklist and visually see, okay, I have to do this, this, and this. Offer parent and child office hours and for the younger ones. For high schoolers and even some middle schoolers, they're comfortable jumping in and meeting with you, but the elementary kiddos probably not as much, and they will need guidance. So expect to see a frame with a parent and child in Zoom, and encourage that. For those parents or guardians that are not as tech savvy, or they're not on board right away, as Laura had mentioned, plan to seek those parents out more and build in more times. Offer options for your parents. So a menu of choices. If you want them to work on sight words, give them a variety of choices of how they can do that. If you want them to work on math facts, give them a variety of choices. That way it provides less of a battle for those parents at home. And one of the biggest takeaways I hope that I can share with you is just be present. Just because you're not face to face with your kids, it doesn't mean you can't send out weekly videos celebrating successes that students have had. It doesn't mean you can't have a weekly challenge at the start of the week and follow up at the end of the week. Maybe you use classroom dojo points in your classroom for different routines and expectations. Find a way to carry that over to the online setting and have like a big announcement celebration rally at the end of the week. And then if you have certain classroom management strategies that worked in your classroom, maybe it would carry over to the home. For instance, maybe as an intention getter, you use chimes. Share those ideas with your parents, because the students are accustomed to that. I know one time I accidentally not hit a chime when I was moving, and all of a sudden here are all the children gathered on the rug in a circle. So doing those things will help your child. If there's a clap pattern that your teacher used, or if you teachers use, share it with your parents so they can carry that routine out at home. If there's a lingo guide, if there's certain strategies you use for math and reading, share that guide with your parents so they can continue to carry that over in the home environment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And I loved what you said about the communication piece. I think that's really important. One thing we have to be careful about is also overwhelming them, which I think you brought up about giving too many text messages. It's just if you send 27 text messages, it's like sending 0 because none of them get read. So really good point, Natasha. Thank you so very much. All right, let's move on to question number 4. And Mary, I'm going to ask you this one. We've heard from educators that are throughout these past couple of weeks that they're talking about how do we help and facilitate parents who don't have access to technology or that have minimal technology and they have a high school kid that's working on something with the computer. How do we help the other kids that are in the household, or those kinds of things? Can you speak to that?
I can, and I think that this is probably the biggest challenge of this whole situation, at least in my district. Within the last 10 minutes, I actually got a text that the governor of my state, which is New Mexico, has officially announced that we are closed for the rest of the year, which you can imagine is devastating, not only for families, but for teachers as well. And part of the devastation there is because we know that our kids don't have equitable access to technology. And without that technology, our options for continuing to teach our students are seriously limited, especially in a state where the poverty level is so high. And many of our families are really, really going to be struggling. So what do we do? Well, I think we do what we do best. We focus on our relationships with our kids. And there's one positive thing. I was discussing this with my own family the other night. There's one good thing out of this whole thing. It's March. It's not September. We've already had a chance to establish some relationships with the families. We know our kids, and we have a pretty good idea of strengths and weaknesses, strengths and needs are, as Laura was discussing. That's really critical at this point. So we can use that knowledge of our students to come up with some ideas for authentic literacy and learning experiences that can be happening in the home without technology. And then it comes down to being in contact with our parents so that they can use those suggestions to focus on authentic experiences. So I want you guys just to imagine this for a second. So Sandra is one of your second graders, and here's what you know about her. She lives at home with her mom. She's got 3 younger brothers and sisters. Elderly grandparents live there as well. The grandparents speak mostly Spanish, a little bit of English. Sandra and her siblings speak English primarily. Sandra wants to learn Spanish. Mom is bilingual. You also know that mom is a maid in a local hotel, and you're a little bit worried about what the situation is. So first thing that you need to do is reach out and talk to mom and Sandra and just touch base and find out how things are going. And through that conversation, do some assessment of what their technology needs and strengths are. So you talk to mom on the phone. She does let you know that she's been laid off. And you ask her in the course of that conversation about whether or not Sandra has access to technology. And you discover, no, they don't have a laptop. They do have a cell phone. But mom is really, really worried that she's going to run out of data. So she's got to limit Sandra's phone time. Now, you have some time to talk to Sandra and touch base with her. And through that, you discover that there are some things that she's been doing to help out with at home that she's enjoying and feeling a sense of ownership and purpose. So you find out that she's been helping mom and grandma with meal prep. She's been helping with taking care of younger brothers and sisters. So let's take that information and brainstorm some possible literacy experiences, specifically literacy, but other learning experiences as well. So here's some possibilities. Maybe she could help mom and grandma with the meal prep, But in doing that, there are so many extensions there. So obviously there's the opportunity to plan the meals. She could even maybe make weekly menus for her family. If she's interested in art, maybe she can do some artistic embellishments with those menus. She could make up the grocery lists. There's some math opportunities there as well. Maybe she makes up a cookbook with grandma's help on recording some of their family recipes. Another thing that she could do is work on her Spanish, and she could do interviews with her grandparents and record what their stories are and write some biographies. Of course, working with brother and sister, although you don't want to burden her with that, maybe she could write some plays to keep them entertained. Then you call Mom and Sandra back. You propose that maybe once a week you touch base with them over the phone. And since they don't have a computer and you know you're not going to be able to email, maybe you plan to mail her some paper and some self-addressed stamped envelopes so that Sandra can do some written work exchanges. Maybe she can do some journaling and exchange some things. So it all really comes back to those relationships and your knowledge of students. What your goal is just try as well as you can to craft some individualized plans that meet them where they are. Because honestly, right now, you may be the one person who can really give them that support.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate you hitting that. You've really sort of targeted some really great ideas for extension and authentic learning. So, and some of these that you've mentioned are really speaking to that elementary, but they can be translated clearly and easily into that high school, middle school environment. You just changed the expectations a little bit. So thank you. You'll notice that we've all dropped off of our video only because we were worried about some of the technology. So we are back now, and we'll come back off and on throughout the rest of this webinar. Sarah, let's open it up to the group. Let's ask some questions and let's get some answers or hear some from our experts on the questions that you're asking the audience. So feel free to type in. And Sarah, what have you seen so far come through?
Yeah, we've had some great questions come through so far. We've seen a couple about special education. So I would love to hear from this group. Could you guys talk a little bit more about how you can support those parents who have a student with some special needs at home, especially as it pertains to making sure that IEP or 504 plan requirements are being met while they're working online at home?
Sure. Laura, can you take that one?
I certainly can. Thank you so much. Couple of things, and to go back to my initial comment that I made in the opening remark, a lot of it has to do with familiarity, and I loved what Ashley was talking about in terms of making sure that the teachers are okay too. Teachers, you need to understand that the Department of Education has issued several memos actually in terms of guidance during this point in time regarding students who are on IEPs or 504s. Yes, of course, you have to, the best of your ability, continue to provide that FAPE service. But the fact of the matter is, we're probably going to be faced with compensatory services when we get back to normal and we return. No one's going to beat anybody up. There's not going to be any dinging, all of that stuff. Do the best you can, but please give yourself the grace to understand that the circumstances aren't perfect. Now, that being said, let's talk about some of the things that you can do. Familiarity and routine are really important. We heard that just a few moments ago. Anything that you can do to preserve that sense of schedule and familiarity with the routine within the household is going to be to your benefit. Visual schedules, even audio reminders, things like that, those are going to be of biggest concern. What you're going to want to do as an educator is, if at all possible, meet with that parent and go through the IEP and address specific goals that you know can be reasonably followed and met within the household. Certainly there are going to be cases and times where you're not going to have the resources and ability. So think of creative ways. Mary made some amazing suggestions. Think of some ways that those goals could in fact be modified. So for example, if you have a student who is reading below grade level and who has concerns regarding their writing and spelling concerns, and that's written into the IEP, then what you want to do is to be able to take some of those household type of activities, whether it's interviewing a member of the household, whether it's care of siblings or grocery planning, which by the way is a fantastic math and science exercise, especially with cooking and meal preparation. But be able to give some suggestions to those parents of concrete ways that they can turn those household activities into learning opportunities. Sometimes I think we stretch too far and try to make it the educational term. A lot of the things that we do within our household on a daily basis are in fact educational. And we need to make sure that our parents and caregivers understand that. One of the activities that I dearly love to do with some of my SPED kids over the years is the ability to create their own board games. And you can do this at a variety of different ages and developmental levels. So for certainly a younger student or a student who has more significant cognitive delays and disabilities, this may change shape. But the idea of creating your own game that you can play with members of your household that are present and sharing that game is an opportunity to learn and practice skills and to celebrate some success and feel that sense of accomplishment.
I love that. That's a great concrete activity, and thank you very much. And one of the things that special ed teachers have been doing these crazy, unique things for each individual students for years. They are rock stars, and I think that if we just are, I love the term that you used about giving grace, giving ourselves grace, and starting to think about this as a way to support parents that teaching them how you do things, teaching them some of the schedules that you keep, teaching them and giving them the support on some of those expectations that you have, I think is a very strong way to approach this. As far as 504s and some of the legal pieces, as I like what you said about that this is going to come back, but in the meantime, here's where we are, and the expectations for keeping an IEP, the expectations for keeping for bringing in OTPT, all of those things are there, and they will continue. We just need to think about doing them in special ways and helping parents do them in those special ways. So thank you very much. Sarah, what do we got for the next one?
Yeah, so I would actually like to do a little bit of a follow-up to some of what Laura was talking about those offline activities. We've had a few questions come in about getting parents more involved like that. Could you guys speak further to beyond those kiddos who need offline options because they don't have access to technology? How can online teachers or teachers in general right now incorporate more of those activities that really get parents involved for all kiddos?
Sure. Ashley, I know that you have got your kids at home too. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, so a couple different opportunities you could have. I would suggest having some form of packet that the students can download and then complete during the week and then re-upload when they are finished. So that way they don't need to have access to online capabilities throughout the week to be able to get it done. You can also work with just printed packets that can be picked up at the schools. A lot of buses are going around delivering meals. You could have it set up so that way they could pick up their packets that way. It can be mailed to their homes, that kind of thing. You're going to need to be looking for items that they would have in their house to complete activities, hands-on activities, and be understanding that there may be the possibility that they don't have access to it and can't get it. I mean, even popsicle sticks to build a bridge may not be something that would be in their house. I don't have popsicle sticks in my house. So when we needed to build a bridge, we used a cardboard box. So make sure that you're giving them options to be able to replace what you are asking them to do with materials that they have in their house, and giving them options to be able to do that activity in an offline kind of way as often as possible in case they don't have that access. We're also finding that people can go to the parking lots of places with Wi-Fi to be able to download and upload their materials. So go outside of Starbucks and attach to their guest Wi-Fi, or the local school. A lot of them, you can go to their parking lots and be able to access Wi-Fi from the parking lot, and then download the materials, go home and work on it for the week, and then upload it at the end.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I've seen that mentioned in the news a number of different ways. So thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah. So for the next question, I'd like to go back to that idea of parent communication. We've had a couple questions come in about, parents feeling overwhelmed by the volume of communication, especially if they have multiple students at home. Could one of our virtual teachers speak a little bit to good ideas to establish an effective cadence of communication so that parents know what they need to know, but aren't getting totally overwhelmed?
Perfect. Natasha, you are one of our virtual teachers. Why don't you take this one?
Of course. Thank you, Winnie. I think the first step is that the teachers should connect with their team. So for instance, if this is an elementary school teacher, then I'm guessing that the communication is probably mainly coming from them. But if it's a high school teacher, they'll want to connect with whoever those cohort of teachers are and come up with a plan to streamline how this communication is going to look. For instance, maybe the first week of the month, the communication is sent by the English teacher. The second week is math. I'm thinking about how we do it in our department because we send out progress reports every month, but we gauge it as far as which department sends it out each week. You might also consider coming together and having like a team-wide meeting where you invite parents to come in and say, okay, we're going to have the team available this time for office hours. Please stop in. And then there's breakout rooms you could use in Zoom, and you could go about conferencing and meeting that way. It's difficult for me to answer that question because I kind of need to know the grade level and do you have a team of people, because it starts like at the school level of how your principal is setting those parameters for you. And then I suggest going out from there.
I think that that's a really fair answer, Natasha, that to understand that there is a different expectation for different grade levels. But I like this idea that it comes from the school and moves its way out. So that's perfect. Ashley, do you want to speak to that a little bit as an administrator in a virtual school?
I actually lost my sound just a second ago. Can you say the question again?
Sure. We're talking about communications, and Natasha pointed out that it can be different from different grade levels, and that it should start from the school or the district and be pushed out as far as how often and what we communicate out with parents. Do you want to speak to that from sort of an administrator's point of view a little bit?
Yeah. So it is overwhelming to get the same communications over and over and over again. So I would say to be as concise as possible. Brene Brown says clear is kind, right? And so have limited communications, make sure it is in bulleted format rather than paragraph. Make it easy for them to read and follow through. Make sure that you're linking clearly to where they can go to get the material, and make sure that you're presenting those announcements in multiple different formats. So if it's going through email, also make sure to have a phone blast. Consider having some sort of text. So it's one message and they can choose where they're going to get it that is most effective for them. And then just be as clear as you possibly can. Get everything accomplished in a concise way in one or two communications, so you're not duplicating the same thing over and over. But I think, Winnie, you said it earlier that 27 texts is like 0 texts, and that's exactly right. If they get 15 notifications in a day, they're just going to ignore them. So be clear, be concise, and make sure that you're covering as much as possible in a logical format for them.
Super. Thank you very much. All right, Sarah, do we have another one?
Yes, we had a really good question come in that I would actually like to address to Laura about working with those young kiddos, kindergartners level, who are still developing really foundational reading skills. How can teachers and parents work together to make sure that those kids continue to make progress while they're working at home?
You know what? I'm going to pass that question over to Mary because she's the literacy specialist on this call.
Perfect.
Tag, you're it, Mary.
Well, so again, I think that we come back. Sorry, did I interrupt you?
Nope, come on up.
Okay. So I think that we come back to those authentic literacy experiences. So one thing that I want to address is that I think it's really important that we keep in mind that we're crisis schooling right now. You know, I think that families were taken aback by the expectation that this is a homeschooling environment. Homeschooling is a completely different ballgame. Families who are stepping into the homeschooling arena do so with preparation and a lot of research. So crisis schooling is going to be a little bit different. And I think that we have to take a breath and, again, give ourselves and our families some grace and look for the tools that our families have at home to address our early literacy skills. So pre-K, kinder, first grade, the types of things that we want to do is go back to some of those early learning experiences that are language based. We really want to do a lot of songs, finger plays, rhyming, come back to those nursery rhymes, the fairy tales and the folk tales. Parents can make up stories and share those with their kids and have the kids reciprocate. In terms of keeping up with phonics and spelling, I would caution teachers, especially when we have very specific ways of teaching reading through different programs. I don't know that we can expect our parents to effectively teach those skills in our absence. So I think that rather than thinking that they're going to be teaching the phonics the way that we teach phonics, we would encourage them instead to work on rhyming and phonological awareness, such as breaking sentences into words and words into syllables.
I think that's a really good point, and this is my passion as well. Early literacy. I came out of the classroom as an early literacy specialist or reading specialist. So many of the things that we do in the classroom that, and I love how you put this, Mary, that we teach them in a very specific and orderly format, and that may not be something that the parents can do. But what they can do is, as you pointed out, is read to the kids, sing to the kids, listen to the kids, start a story once upon a time and have the children finish it. Those kinds of things are all those great pre-reading skills and those foundational pieces that will build to that. You know, just the simple exposure to reading time, sitting and reading and making up their own stories to the pictures. All of those things are critical. And I love this term crisis schooling. It's a good word because it really does speak to where we are right now. So thank you. Okay, Sarah.
Yes. So first off, I just want to say we're going to move the slides along here to a list of resources that we've prepared. So you guys will see that in just a second. These are all great resources that you will get sent out at the end of the presentation as well, but just you know, more information that you can check out later on. As for a next question, so we had one come in that I think this is a really interesting one. For teachers providing resource room services, how are some of those services going to be translated now that kids are working at home, and how can parents be involved in the process of providing some of those extra services?
Oh, that's it. That is really interesting. Laura, do you want to take this one on too?
Well, I'll try, but based on you know, I'm thinking that one through, and there's so many variables in there. And
Exactly.
again, I mean, we've talked through the fact that if we've got families that have limited access to technology, you know, Mary gave the example of a parent who doesn't have as much data on their cell phone and so on. So that's really going to limit those kinds of interaction, and not knowing what the existing setup was for a particular resource room. I think I would go back to some of the fundamentals here in terms of communication and making yourselves available. If
Mhm.
your school has already established a resource room that is known to your families, the student has a relationship with those teachers, you're going to want to do everything you can to keep that relationship going. I'm not talking so much about, you know, interventions and mediation. I'm talking about the relationship, because especially when we start talking about special ed students, well, all students, The relationship that they develop with their teachers is absolutely critical, and we want to do everything we can to preserve that. So if they can set up office hours by phone and on Zoom or Skype or what have you, and just allow those students to talk and be present, from there you can probably establish some timeline or probability of saying, do you have some work that you'd like me to go through with you? Or are you having some difficulties with this? Same thing, being able to offer that to the parent. I mean, Mary's point is very well taken, that we can't just assume that all of a sudden our parents are going to be literacy specialists. That's highly unreasonable. But we can do some baby steps here in this crisis schooling mode. So what services legitimately could a resource teacher provide that are actually going to help and not frustrate the child and not frustrate or confuse the parent? That would be my advice as administrator. Think it through. Are you actually going to provide something that's going to help as opposed to causing more frustration or confusion?
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Laura. I think that you've said it clearly. And I think it goes back to something that we've talked about already today, is that we're in March and we have had the opportunities to build up these connections and make these relationships. And so finding ways in which to connect back to our students is reasonable. I mean, we can do that. That is something that we can live through. And if it's technology hampered or enhanced, we have that. We can do it. We have that piece. How amazing would it be to be able to see the trophy that the kid won at baseball when he shows it to you in the Zoom meeting or something along those lines. I think it just starts to bring in a different level to it. So thank you. All right, Sarah, what else have we got?
Yeah, we had a really good question come in about how educators and parents can work together during this time to help kids continue to work on their social skills and attention skills, especially as they're, spending more time on technology.
Good point. Ashley, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So, that's hard right now.
Yeah.
I would like to say encourage them to go out and play with neighbors, but right now there isn't that. Having regular Zoom or Google Meet or Google Hangout sessions and encouraging your students to turn their webcams on, I would suggest to be able just to have that face-to-face interaction with their classmates. My son had a class with his teacher this morning, and they did a scavenger hunt, and she'd say, find something made out of wood that is not furniture, and then they had to run through their house and see if they could find something. So those kind of activities are good to be able to just keep that sense of community going within your classroom. Encourage them to FaceTime with their family and their friends. Encourage them to write emails to each other, which is a skill that actually we need to be teaching to our kids first. But encourage them to be in virtual contact with people as often as they can to build those social skills. You're also going to need to teach some of those online etiquette kind of rules to the students. Teach them how you expect an email to be laid out. Do you always want the student to start it, Dear Miss O'Neill, or do you have some other expectation? But make sure that you're teaching them how you want them to have those online etiquette, those guidelines for your own classroom. Other than that, like, it's hard right now. It's hard for everybody because we're all missing that social connection at this point. So just do as much as you can. Encourage them. What I'm doing with my own boys is encouraging them to have races and games with the neighbors from across the street. And so they'll be on opposite sides of the road, and they're running back and forth and racing that way. Games and things like that can help to keep those social skills going.
I think that's brilliant. Yeah, no, I ran into this with my nephew who was really pushing back on wanting to join a Zoom meeting and wanting to be engaged in what they were doing. He just felt like that it was pointless. That I gave him granola bar, and we joined a meeting, and he found that to be much more exciting. But it's a matter of doing too. I think this is new to them as well, and they find it's, you know, he needed to do it in order to see that he could do it.
Right. It's overwhelming at first. It's scary. But usually, if you can just convince them to come in that one time, then they'll be hooked and they'll understand it's not as scary as it once was. You may need to engage the parents in that as well to try to convince them. Tell them, give me just one time. Do this one time, and I won't require you to do it again. But also, I did want to say that you should talk to them about some being on camera guidelines as well. Remind them about trying to have a wall behind them, making sure that everybody is fully clothed in the background of their videos. They don't have a little brother running around who's potty training behind them, that kind of thing. And those are expectations you do need to actually verbalize to them and make sure that they understand.
That's a really good point. Yeah. All right. Sarah, do we have another question?
Yes, so we've had a question come in about how can you set expectations with parents around academic integrity while kids are working at home?
Academic integrity. Okay. Natasha, do you want to start with that?
Yes, yes, I'd be happy to. Really quick, I just thought of an idea to add on to Ashley's response. You could have, if you had morning meeting in your classroom, you could have like a mini morning meeting where maybe you have a group of 10 students together in one session and then another 10 in the other session, and you can work on the sharing part of the morning meeting, and that would help also build those social skills. In terms of academic integrity, relying on your school district's policy for plagiarism is going to probably be the most important thing you'll want to start with. Having resources available for students to understand the difference between like what is plagiarism, right, and what is paraphrasing. I think it's going to vary depending on the age group. I know I said that before, but if we're talking about high schoolers and we're asking them to write an essay, you know, that expectation is going to look different from an elementary student. But I think just referring back to your district's policy, having clear expectations about the difference between plagiarism and paraphrasing. There is a resource, I don't know if Winnie, if you had a chance to post it on the Educator Network, but there's an excellent video that explains what it means to plagiarize, and it's broken down in a very clear format, and it's used with graphics, so it's pretty engaging.
Oh, cool. I don't know that it's been posted, so but I will post it next. That's great to have. I think that there's also the idea of accountability. Natasha, I love that you're saying to follow the district policies and procedures, but I think it's also worthy to say that if we're moving into this unique world of instruction that we have been thrust into, that some of the things that we're going to choose to do are going to be directed to projects too. So if we're handling some projects, those projects will look different and they'll be less vulnerable to plagiarism. Mary, do you have something that you want to add to that as well with the integrity piece?
I do. You know, this has come up a lot with librarians recently. And one thing that I've done as the school librarian is I've been making daily videos to check in with my kids. And one of the very first things that I did is I taught in a video about copyright infringement and about how, as a librarian and a teacher, it's my responsibility to make sure that I am modeling good copyright behavior. Now, one of the things that our publishers have done is they've lifted their very stringent copyright restrictions during this time so that educators can be reading aloud to their kids and sharing books with their kids online. But I also think that it's really important that we still adhere to their new policies during this time of crisis schooling. So if people aren't familiar with those new policies, School Library Journal has recently released an article. I'm not sure how to get it all to you guys, but If you look up School Library Journal publisher copyright, it comes up very early in the Google Drive or in the Google Docs.
We can
Sorry.
absolutely get access to that. If you want to send it on, we can put it into this and send it back to the
Perfect,
team.
I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, Sarah, anything else that we should be addressing?
Yeah, I think we may be down to the last question here, or we might have time for one more after this. But we've had a couple questions come in about how can you support those parents who, for them, the content that their student is working on is a little beyond their understanding, whether it's just because this is a high school student taking a more advanced class, or maybe it's a parent who's also an ELL. How can we support those parents who don't have a great grasp of the material they're on their own?
I consider myself a smart person most of the time, and my 8th grader came to me with a bat and a ball, and he said, I had a physics question, and he says, how is this, a bat hitting a ball or a ball hitting a bat? And I just looked at him like he was nuts, but this is a real question that he's got, and I don't have the ability to help them. This is a real good, this is a real life situation. Ashley, do you have any suggestions on this, or you want to approach this one at all?
I do. I'm a math teacher.
There
And
you
so
go.
I hear this a lot, right? Almost every day I have a parent who will say to me, I can't help him with this. And my response is always the same. I don't expect you to help him with this. I'm his teacher, and I don't need you to be his teacher. I need you to be his cheerleader, and I need you to be his support, and I need you to encourage him to ask me questions, but I don't have to have the parent teaching. And it's important for us to remember that, especially with the older grades. There is going to be some instruction that the little ones are going to need from their parents, simply because it's impossible in that format to be able to fully teach a preschooler through an online format, right? But at the middle and high school level, especially when the content is a little bit more specific and more difficult, and even in the elementary ages with the upper grades, you need to make it clear to the parents that they are the parents. You need them. You need their support in getting the kids to the online sessions. You need their support in making sure that the students are completing their work. But what they need to do is funnel the students to you as the teacher to answer the content questions. So remind them of your office hours, remind them of the help videos, remind them how to reach you, but make sure that you've communicated to them that you are the teacher. You are still in this with them. You are still in this and prepared to teach the students and move them forward, even from your home, and that they are not expected to do that. They do not have to be a math teacher right now.
That's perfect. Thank you very much. That makes me feel a lot better. It's perfect. All right, Sarah, do we have, I think we've got time for one last one. Do you have one?
Sure, we can move through one more question pretty quickly here.
Okay.
So I think I know we've talked a little bit about schedules. Could Natasha or Ashley speak more specifically to the difference between schedules for those younger elementary students versus secondary, middle school, high school students,
Sure.
and what kind of direction you can give parents on that?
Yeah. Natasha, why don't you start us off? And then I think Mary and Ashley have things to say to this as well.
Sure. For a younger student, I recommend trying to follow the same kind of day they had in the classroom if it's at all possible. If not, then so be it. It's not the end of the world. But for instance, let's say in the morning your student has word work and then they do a little bit of reading. Have that same schedule during your day at home. The younger kids, you're going to want to make it shorter. You don't want to expect them to sit there for like 45 minutes and do word work and reading. Make it smaller, have breaks and movement in there, and then bring them back and work on the next subject. So try to chunk your subjects over the day. So reading and then breaks, math, breaks, any kind of enrichment breaks. A great way to build in a break is with a Go Noodle. It's just like a physical movement type of application where you could throw a video up and the kids do whatever they're doing on the screen, whether it be dancing or wiggling around. So I think For the younger ones, they need guidance. They definitely need some kind of consistent, concrete schedule, and they need breaks. For the older kids, because they are more independent, maybe they have some buy-in into what their day looks like with their schedule. I always recommend, though, that they start with the subject that they find least favorable. Knock that one out of the way in all cases. So if you're not a social studies person, let's do that work first, okay? And end the day with the subject that you enjoy the most, so you have something to look forward to. So that's what I would recommend for those high schoolers.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Natasha. I also think it's worth noting too that your school day doesn't look like 8 hours in front of a computer. You know, there's for any age at all. So I know, Natasha, you've mentioned that in previous webinars where we don't, we couldn't,
Right.
sit, we can't sit in front of a computer for an hour. That's a stretch for us,
right.
and we're grown-ups.
Yes, and then for the high schoolers and the middle schoolers, as far as if you're a content teacher, you'll want to break up the material in chunks. And if you're doing recordings, provide it with like the specific skill. So maybe if it's writing your essay, thesis statements, make recordings on that. Writing the essay, the middle part, make recordings on that. And when you make a suggested schedule for your students, it just kind of helps chunk it more and break up the day. So regardless of any grade level, Winnie, like you said, making sure that we understand it's not an 8-hour day, because a lot of that school day is, transitions being built in, going to and fro, lining up, the specialists. So that knocks out a big chunk of the school day right there.
Right. Mary, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I'll summarize this as quickly as possible. One of the things, and really I can speak to the younger ones more than the older ones, but one of the things that we talked with our families about was thinking about scheduling their day into 5 categories. So something productive, something outside, something creative, something educational, something fun, and to have the kids brainstorm with the parents how they were going to kind of fill those categories. And we know that with our younger kids that they probably can't get through an educational activity that's more than about 20 minutes in length per grade level. So 20 minutes for kindergarten, maybe 30, 40 minutes for first grade and so on. So we have to be careful not to pile on too much with our little ones because we know how frequently they need to get up and move around.
That's perfect. I love that idea of building a schedule and then letting them have a voice in it too. I think that's brilliant. Ashley, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, just for the sake of time, I'll be real brief, but I would just say that less is more. So you're not going to have a math lesson that's 50 minutes long. Keep it short, 10 to 15 minutes, and that should be about as much direct instruction as you need to give at a time.
Sure. Okay. So, Sarah, I'm going to go ahead and let us to wrap this up at the top of the hour. I think that there are some really great things we've learned. One is building your schedule, and Mary, you said creative, movement, reading. What were your 5 categories?
So they were fun, educational, creative, outside movement, and productive.
Brilliant. Okay.
So
productive
might be cleaning out my closets.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sarah, to end this up. But thank you very much, the panelists, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Actually, Winnie, I'm going to jump in real quick, and I'm just going to do some last minute housekeeping things because we are coming up on time. And I want to remind everyone that today's session was recorded, and we'll be sending you an email with that recording, the presentation slides, your certificate of attendance, and many of the other resources mentioned in today's webinar by the end of the day. But if you do need your certificate of attendance or the PowerPoint slides, remember they are in the handout section of your control panel. I'll give you guys a little bit of time to find those. And then lastly, if you did not, if we missed one of your questions, we had a lot of awesome questions come in today. There's a survey as you exit the webinar where you can add those in, and we're working hard to make sure those questions get answered. Lastly, Whitney, you already said this, but I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise. And again, thank you all for joining us. We know your time is valuable. We are at the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. But we really hope this has helped you in this time of uncertainty. So thank you all so much and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Haley, on the next slide, there's also a list of other resources too, so maybe we throw that one up.
All right. Once I navigate.
There you go. Perfect.
All right, and that is going to be, that's in the PowerPoint slides in your handout section, so you guys can actually link directly to all of those. All right, thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Have a great day.